So right now we'll begin our third session for the Chicana Symposium today. We've had great turnout so far and we're going strong. Now we're going to begin our piece on immigration with Professors Jennifer Chacon and Kevin Johnson from the School of Law here at Davis. We will be ending this discussion at 2:15, so we're pushing it back 15 minutes since we're beginning a little bit later than we thought we would. So Jennifer Chacon received an AB with distinction from Stanford University and was awarded her JD from Yale School of Law. After graduation, she served as a law clerk to the Honorable Sidney R. Thomas, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. From 1999 to 2003, she was an attorney with Davis Polk and Warwell in New York City. After a fellowship at Yale, she began teaching at UC Davis School of Law. She teaches criminal law, criminal procedure, and immigration law. Her recent focus is on the intersection between the criminal law and immigration law, and she has recently published articles in the Portland Law Review, the Connecticut Law Review, the Wisconsin Law Review, and the University of Chicago Legal Forum. Kevin R. Johnson is Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the School of Law, and Nathia Palace, Professor of Public Law in Chicana Studies at the University of California, Davis. His book, How to Get to Be Mexican, A White Brown Man's Search for Identity, published in 1999, was nominated for the 2000 Robert F. Kennedy Book Award. His latest book is Opening the Floodgates, Why America Needs to Rethink Its Borders and Immigration Laws, published in 2007. He currently serves as president of the Board of Directors of Legal Services of Northern California and on the board of the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, also known as MALDA. Professor Johnson is also a co-editor of an immigration professor's blog at lawprofessors.typepad.com/immigration. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Jennifer Chacon.
Is this working now? No? Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the kind introduction, Alfredo. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some basic facts about immigration, and Professor Chacon is going to talk about the immigration reform proposals that were on the table the last few years, including the one from last year on comprehensive immigration reform. And just to give you some background, both of us have been involved in thinking very concretely and specifically about immigration reform. We are both on the immigration policy group for Senator Barack Obama's campaign and talk about some of these issues. And actually last week I was in San Antonio with the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund litigation committee and board of directors talking about some of these immigration issues that have been arising across the United States. So it's not just we're over in the law school thinking about these things, it's things that we're involved in real life. Now, as you all know, it's really an understatement to say that immigration is a hot button controversial topic. It's really one of the burning issues of the modern political debate and the debate that's ongoing with the election. And I think it's really one of the civil rights issues for the 21st century. And as a political matter and as a legal matter, immigration is really, really, really complex. Politically, immigration is not a simple Democratic, Republican, blue state, red state issue. In fact, and I find this almost very difficult to say, especially in this audience, I have much more in common with President Bush on his immigration views than I do with President Clinton, his immigration views. In fact, President Clinton may have been one of the worst presidents of last century on issues of immigration. So politically, immigration is a very difficult issue. And legally, immigration law is governed by a notoriously complex statute. It's the Immigration Nationality Act, which is literally thousands of pages long, and some people say is only rivaled by the Internal Revenue Code in terms of its complexity. Very complex, very difficult, very, very hard to follow, particularly in certain places. And one of the interesting things about immigration law is that while we have a constitution that allegedly protects certain rights, like First Amendment rights, equal protection rights, and a variety of other rights, the immigration laws are almost, in large part, immune from those constitutional protections. So we have things in our immigration laws like a variety of provisions that are designed to keep out poor people from entering the country. There's a public charge exclusion that's designed to make it hard for poor and working folks to come to the United States. It'd be very difficult to have anything like that regulating the poor in the United States, but we have it in our immigration laws, and there's a set set of doctrines that the Supreme Court has enunciated that make it very difficult to strike down any provisions or immigration laws. Now, over the last few years, I've had an opportunity to go around the country and talk about issues of immigration and immigration reform. And one of the things that's very clear to me now is that immigration is not just an issue limited to the Southwest, but is an issue across the United States. In fact, some of the areas of the country where immigration is the hottest in terms of a political issue are places like Georgia, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, South Carolina, states that have seen increased immigration, particularly of Mexican migrants in recent years, but previously not seen much immigration. It's not just an issue, immigration is not just an issue limited to California, Arizona, and Texas anymore. It's really a national issue. And recently I was in Indiana, and I couldn't believe this when I was told this, but some people from the community, Mexican-American activists, told me that in southern Indiana, the Ku Klux Klan was trying to recruit black members, complaining they needed some help in dealing with all the illegal aliens in the south of Indiana. It struck me as a hard sell, but it still was one being made. But immigration is now a national issue, and I want to highlight some very important facts to keep in mind in thinking about immigration reform, and the like. And these, are, for the most part, are undisputed facts. Fact number one, and this will seem like an idiotic fact for me to relay to you. There are many undocumented immigrants who live in the United States. The best estimate is somewhere between 10.5 and 12 million undocumented people live and work in this country. And one of the things to keep in mind is that this is a much larger number than we had in 1994. Over the last decade, a little more than a decade, we've seen a doubling of our undocumented immigrant population in the United States. Now, one of the interesting things that happened beginning in 1994 is that the federal government ramped up its enforcement of the border. It began a number of operations, including Operation Gatekeeper, south of San Diego, Operation Hold the Line in El Paso, and a number of other high-profile operations that were designed to seal the border. Those operations, for the most part, have had some very negative consequences that I'll talk about later, including deaths, but they have not had a huge impact. They've had a very limited impact on limiting undocumented immigrant population, because as I said, today we have somewhere between 10.5 and 12 million undocumented immigrants. In 1994, we had somewhere between 5 and 6. Fact number two, most undocumented immigrants come to the United States to work for jobs. There's little social science evidence that there's any other reason. There's some other smaller reasons. There's family reunification, other things. But most undocumented immigrants come here knowing that they can work if they make it to the United States. Fact number three, and this is one that many people really don't get. There are two types of undocumented immigrants. There are people who enter without inspection. Those are the types you often probably think about when you think about undocumented immigrants. People who cross the border, not at a checkpoint, not at a port of entry, but basically either were smuggled in or snuck into the United States. That's about 60% of the undocumented immigrant population. 40% of the undocumented immigrant population are people who entered legally, but overstayed the terms of their visas. Students, tourists, business visitors, and the like. And as I said, there are about 40% of the undocumented immigrants are people who enter legally but overstayed their visas. They're known as visa overstays. Why is that distinction important? Well, that distinction is important because if you're talking about border enforcement and border fences is a way of decreasing the undocumented immigrant population, you're only talking about measures that would address part of the problem. That is, if you view undocumented immigration as a problem. You're talking about measures that would stop people from entering without inspection. If you're not focused on visa overstays and interior enforcement of the immigration laws, you're not dealing with 40% of the undocumented immigrant population. So all the talk about border fences, more border patrol officers along the border, that's talking about part of the undocumented immigrant population, not all of it. Fact number four, There's an awful lot of people, and this is another obvious fact, that think that there are some serious problems with our current immigration system. And I can list to you many of the problems that most people, or many people, would agree to. We have a large undocumented immigrant population. We have horrible problems with human trafficking that Professor Chacon has written eloquently about. Trafficking of people into the United States, sometimes being forced to work once coming to the United States to pay off their debts, not just in the sex industry, but as a general labor market problem as well. We have a situation currently where thousands of people have died in the last decade along the border. One of the things that happened as a result of those operations I talked a few minutes about was that people didn't stop migrating to the United States. They just became rerouted in coming to the United States. And migrants have taken more dangerous routes through deserts and mountains, and more have died. Thousands have died as a direct result of our border enforcement policies. If you want to get a sort of running death toll of the people killed from one border enforcement operation, Operation Gatekeeper, you can look at www.stopgatekeeper.org. And just a few weeks ago, it was somewhere around 3,000 people whose death was attributed to that one border operation, maybe more now. And that's just one of number. So we have deaths on the border, we have a large undocumented immigrant population, and we have labor exploitation. We have a labor market now where many undocumented immigrants work, where they're exploited, where there's no law that applies, no minimum wage law, no wage condition protections that are enforced anyway. And what I've termed it, when I've written about it, is this is sort of the new Jim Crow. This is a racial caste labor force with one market, predominantly people of color, where law doesn't apply, while the other labor market, predominantly Anglo labor market, where law does apply. Now, our current immigration laws, the cause of many of these problems, as I mentioned before, are pretty complex. But the basic idea behind these laws are to limit the number of people coming to the United States. And in particular, to limit the number of poor and working people who can come legally to the United States. And the basic presumption under our current immigration laws is that you cannot enter the country unless you fall into one of four basic categories. And those categories are one, you have a family member in this country who can sponsor your immigration. Two, you're eligible for an employment visa, which is hard to be eligible for because they're relatively few in number, and they're limited primarily to high-skilled immigrants. You can fall into a diversity visa category. In diversity visa categories, it's a very complicated formula that's used to determine the number of people can come and where they can come from who are eligible for these visas. But the idea behind these visas was to increase the number of white people immigrating to the United States, to diversify the immigrant stream and make it less populated by people of color. The fourth category of immigrants are those who are eligible because of their refugee status. They're refugees. They fled political or related persecution. Those are the four basic categories you have to fall into to legally come to the United States. And on top of these sort of limited categories, there are many numerical and other limitations, per country limitations, on how many people can come in any 1 year to the United States. Now, what does this all mean? It means, well, we have immigration laws that are narrow in scope, where it's hard to come legally. And for many people, when you hear the claim, well, these undocumented people should wait in line like everybody else, one of the important things to keep in mind is that for many low and working people, there isn't any line for them to get into. There's not a family member that can sponsor them. They're not high skilled, so they're not eligible for an employment visa. They're not from a country eligible for diversity visas, and they're not eligible for refugee status. So many of the undocumented immigrants who come to the United States don't come because they're trying to jump in line. They're coming to the United States because there's no line for them to wait in. Now, at the same time, while there isn't a legal way for many immigrants to come to the United States, people understand, and the word of mouth has it, that if you make it into this country, enter without inspection, if you overstay the terms of your visa, you can get a job in the United States. And undocumented immigrants know that if they make it through border enforcement, they make it to this country, they can get a job. And that's because the ban on employing undocumented immigrants is widely violated. Many large companies don't follow the bar, the prohibition of employing undocumented immigrants. Groups like Tyson Foods, Disneyland, and other large corporations often employ undocumented immigrants. And many people don't even view it as a crime to employ undocumented immigrants. Ironically, the first two nominees for Attorney General in the Clinton administration were disqualified from office, had to withdraw their nomination because they had employed undocumented immigrants in the home. Zoe Baird was a general counsel for Prudential. She looked like a pretty good candidate until it was found out that she had employed undocumented immigrants in the home. Otherwise, I think Zoe Baird is very much a law-abiding person. Kimba Wood, a federal district judge in New York, she was also rumored to be an attorney general nominee, but she also had to withdraw her nomination because of her employment of undocumented immigrants in the home. And it's not just sort of a Democratic issue. Two nominees of President Bush also had to withdraw their nominations because they had employed undocumented immigrants in the home. Linda Chavez, the conservative commentator, was not nominated to be Secretary of Labor, but she had to withdraw a nomination, and you can guess why. Ironically enough, the first nominee to be Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, which is now in charge with enforcing the immigration laws, Bernard Kerik, who is also the former police chief in New York City, he had to withdraw his nomination for reasons you can think about. Now, that's where we stand in terms of our immigration laws. We have a system that lets in a small group of people. It may seem like a lot to some, but a relatively small group of people that makes it very hard for poor and working people to come to the United States. And it's resulted in a large undocumented immigrant population in this country. And then the question is, well, what do we do to address the problem? And that was what comprehensive immigration reform was supposed to be all about. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about comprehensive immigration reform. And I say that, and I want to kind of limit the scope of what you're going to expect from me. When we talk about comprehensive immigration reform, I think different people have different ideas about what that means. And I think if you talk to Dean Johnson, you'll get an idea of a highly liberalized immigration system, one where the presumption is of admissibility, where there's